The Open Highway podcast is a production of Viking Dog Entertainment, and now you can visit the all-new Viking Dog store for access to everything that Viking Dog has to offer. Movies, books, and apparel, including motivational lines, open highway merchandise, and exclusive wolf designs that raise money for wolf rescue organizations. So visit thevikingdogstore.com today.
Hello, great minds! Mr. DGMH here, but wait, what the hell is DGMH? DGMH, or Drinks with Great Minds in History, is a weekly podcast that covers one of history's greatest minds each month, while we enjoy, review, and rate themed cocktails, liquors, and beers on the scale of greatness. As greats like Alexander Hamilton square off against George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and more, DGMH is the perfect cocktail of history, sarcasm, and alcohol, with a twist of psych and a bunch of shots along the way. So grab yourself a drink with some great minds in history. Cheers!
Great to be back because you were the first episode. You were one of the first episodes, and you were really, really popular. And like I was telling you, not as much anymore. No, I'm just kidding. But it's great to have you back. Part of the reason I wanted to have you back is I wanted to talk about policing some more. But what I wanted to talk about is, so today's Halloween. Today's Sunday, and by the time this hits, it'll be after the deadline. So in New York City today is the deadline for cops to get vaccinated, and I know all across the country there's some different deadlines, but so I wanted to ask you straight off, what the hell's going on with these guys? What's going through their heads? And I don't mean that in like an accusing way. I just mean that as wow, there's got to be a lot of different forces at play here, because you wouldn't think this would be such a political third rail. You wouldn't think it would be such a big deal. Have you talked to anyone? Like, have you talked to any of your cohorts or your old friends or anything?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've had this conversation not just with police, but other first responders as well, firefighters, paramedics. A lot of people that I know that work for the Department of Homeland Security, which is the federal government's largest law enforcement arm now, believe it or not. So just the way that bureau has grown, as well as some guys in the Bureau of Prisons, CBP, which is a division of DHS, but they have their own rules. Veterans Affairs as well. I've talked to some guys that work for Veterans Affairs, and it's been really interesting. I think I definitely echo your sort of surprise, and it's definitely interesting. Why are people who have committed their lives to public safety now not towing the line on doing what's best for public safety? I think that's a great question to ask right now.
Yeah. What are they saying? What are they telling? What are you telling? You're my inside line here, man.
I'm getting a lot of different feedback, and the feedback that I'm getting, I can say is I think it is on par with the type of feedback we're getting across the country from different demographics, racial demographics, ethnic demographics, age demographics, rural versus urban demographics. What I think we're seeing is a more complex issue than just looking at police and vaccines. I think that now we're getting to the heart of America when it comes to looking at this vaccine. I think that this really puts cultural, sort of subcultural differences, I think, on the line here. Yeah. And the last time I was on your show, we talked about how law enforcement in itself is its own microcosm of a fraternal subculture. And I think we're seeing that reflected now. And, for police, let's focus on police specifically. I mean, COVID has been the number one killer of police since the pandemic began. 5 times more police officers have died from COVID-related illnesses than they have gunfire since the pandemic started as well. I think the most recent numbers I looked at was 476 police officers have died of COVID. this started. So, and when we look at those numbers, and it's also important to realize that there are over 60 million police contacts across the United States annually, and just the propensity to spread a virus or to become exposed to somebody carrying a virus, I think is definitely heightened in the profession, law enforcement, first responder profession as well. So it's very interesting. Some of the people that I talk to that come from sort of more urban environment or older, they're more likely to have taken the vaccine or be less hesitant. The younger and the whiter of the person that I talk to, it tends to be more hesitant, as well as if they're from a more rural background. Yeah, but that actually reflects the CDC's their statistics that they've gathered on those that have had COVID vaccinations. So which is really interesting. I mean, if you look at what the CDC has put out there most recently, I think the 19th of October was the last time they put out some stats. The younger you are, the less likely you are to have had a COVID vaccination. So 12 to 17, it's only 49%, 18 to 24 is 55.5%, and then 25 to 39 is 59%. So if you look at 40 and under, we're talking less than 60% of the overall population has received their COVID vaccination.
So let's look at this, and I have so many questions because I'm going to be the first to admit, like, I'm vaccinated, and my opinion on the whole situation has definitely evolved over the last 6 months. Like, it's, we get into this position where it's like, okay, well, now you're going to need another booster. Now you're going to need another booster. And like now in California, it's like you can't go anywhere unless you have your card or your the little computerized thing. You can't anywhere. It starts on the 6th, I believe, is no gym, no restaurant, no bars, no nothing. But my feelings on it definitely evolve. It's not a simple black and white issue. But one thing, let's look at it this way. So if you're a police officer, you get a tetanus shot, right? Because you don't want to get the rusty nail or a rusty something. So it's a safety issue for yourself. So it seems like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because on the show, I'm getting really good at allowing people to correct me when I'm wrong. It definitely does happen. But there's two ways to go about it. They're protecting themselves, but then there's also the public interest of that way they're not spreading it, or they can still serve their job, and because they're going to interact with other people, even though we know that even with the vaccine, you can still get it, but you don't pass it as easily. And we're still learning all of these different factors. So is it the fact, like you said, that it's a reflection of the population as a whole, that they don't want to get, let's call it the tetanus route? It's like, protect yourself from the rusty nail. You're going to be dealing with more people on a daily basis than an average person does, because that's your job.
Yeah, you're right. So
why isn't that playing?
Until somebody does a really good study on all of this and gathers a lot of data, we can speculate on a few known data points that we have. And I think that absent of getting some of those verified numbers in from actual first responders, actual law enforcement, I think what we can do is look at, it's the CDC. They released an advisory earlier this year, talking about how the younger a person is, how I just said, the less likely they are to have a vaccination. There could be a tie between that and, younger people might be thinking, hey, I'm not going to get sick, or if I'm going to, the numbers are skewed towards the immunocompromised and the elderly, becoming seriously ill or dying. So I don't really have to worry about that. I've certainly heard that from quite a few officers as well, that, I don't think it's going to hurt me. So, it's just a flu. I don't have to worry about it. This is all hype, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the variable that we have with COVID that I don't think we've had with other, contagions out there that we have vaccines for, is the politicization of the subject of a pandemic. And
Mm.
one thing that I can say for sure, and this is anecdotally, is some of the police officers that I'm talking to, the ones that skew maybe more conservative in their ideology, are more apt to question the validity of the data that's released by the CDC, by the World Health Organization, by state health boards, and things like that. We're talking institutions that are an authority on the issue. They're more likely to doubt that because the the political atmosphere has become so polarized now, and it's become an issue of control. I think that's the way that I've seen it skewed.
Yeah. So let me jump in there. So last
Sure.
time you were on here, we had a really cool moment where we talked about FOP and the union, and that I would have to think that plays into this somehow, because it's the unions that are stepping up and filing these lawsuits and filing, in Chicago, they just lost a court case. I believe it was yesterday, or it was, they said that the city council mandate stands, and they're fighting that. I know New York's got one going, but it's the union that's fighting that. So how does that play into it when you've got this powerful organization that's doing the fighting? Are they doing the will of the police is another question.
So that's a fantastic point to make there, honestly. And it's not just the police union in Chicago. It's the same for the union in Seattle and New York, Boston. A few other states. The unions are actively encouraging a lot of these law enforcement officers to not comply with vaccine mandates. And I do think that I think that it plays in there. One thing that we talked about a little bit the last time that I was here was morale among law enforcement officers, and something that we've seen over the pandemic is we've seen, as a lot of other sectors of the labor force, have lost a lot of employees. We've seen employment drop for law enforcement agencies as well. And so with that, comes the tightening of budgets, slashing of overtime, maybe not having the same benefits as they used to have. I know that the Seattle Police Department announced that their non-patrol officers, like detectives, investigators, people like that, are now going to be responding to certain calls for service, instead of supporting, or they're supporting patrol instead of focusing on what their mission is, what their assignment is. And among that, there's been locally a lot of benefits and pay freezes, and so morale has not been the best. And people have been leaving. People who can leave, that are at retirement age, have been leaving in droves. People that are young enough to start a second career, we are seeing are also leaving. And so it's to a point now where that morale, the angst of law enforcement officers that I've seen, they're angry at their command staff in their local government. They feel like their local government, pretty much their bosses, in effect, are the ones that are causing these issues. Well, now their bosses are coming and saying, hey, by the way, you have to get this vaccine or you can't do your job anymore.
Yeah. So in your opinion, or like, what do you think? We talked about last time, we were talking about how the BLM and defunding the police, and we were talking about the morale that was, like you said, the morale was already down from that. So this is in ways, it sounds like this is almost a snowball effect. Like they're already ticked. They're already pissed off. So now you add something. Is that a part of it? Just adding gas to the fire?
That's exactly what I think it is. Absolutely. I do. I think that. So, okay. A lot of law enforcement officers, we talked about this as well, they view their job as an identity, right? They don't go to work to be police officers for 8 hours a day. They are police officers. It becomes, for better or worse, that becomes a part of their identity. We talked about that. I don't remember if it was on the recorded portion of our interview, or if it was just you and I talking, but we talked about that, and about how dangerous I think that is. In terms of mental health for law enforcement officers, for a job to be an identity, it comes with a whole set of mental health issues that are not helpful. And so now these guys and girls that see that that their identity is being challenged. You can't do your job anymore. You can't be who you are anymore unless you comply. Like there's a condition now to who they are. And it's almost like their identity is being challenged. And so I think that's what makes it a little bit different than just, I'd say maybe, you know, the private sector with people that, because there are vaccine mandates in the private sector. And although there's some pushback, it's not the same. I mean, if you look at the public sector, you know, it's just not the same. The pushback is a little bit different, you know.
Yeah.
But anecdotally, I think a lot of it has to do with that identity of feeling like they're who they are is being challenged by something that they don't have control over. And since they don't have control over, we're talking about people who, for a living, you know, they wield authority, you know, and now the roles are being reversed. And now they're the ones that are under an authority, and they don't have control over whether they comply or not, and it endangers their identity. I just think that's a recipe for, you know, a morale disaster, honestly.
Yeah. Well, you're seeing mass, you mentioned it too, but I've seen it in the news. You're seeing mass, they're not resignations, they're retirements. And in New York,
Correct.
did you see the story about New York? They actually opened up a hall to prepare for all of the people that are going to come in and retire early. And they've already had people coming in. They kicked the reporter out because they didn't want him to see. But yeah, they have a massive auditorium set up, prepared to file the paperwork.
Yeah.
In New York City. I'm sure the same thing's going on in Chicago. And I mean, no matter how you feel about Lightfoot in Chicago, like they don't like her. they haven't liked her before all this stuff.
No,
but,
absolutely not.
You know, it's so how do we, you know, that's a problem then, because now you're going to have a lack of police force. Then it becomes a safety issue. And there's this video going around to lighten things up a little bit, but I don't know if you've seen it, but it's this funny video that goes around where they said it's hiring a police officer in the past, and it's the hiring process. And it's like, okay, well, it's a 6-month process. We have to do a background check. And they go, and we see in your permanent record that once in kindergarten, you said you had perfect attendance, but actually you went to a doctor's office once. So we're going to have to research that and make sure it's real. And then it's like hiring a police officer now. Hi, we saw you at the job fair. Can you start today? Yeah, we know that you have a criminal record, but yeah, we got a suit ready for you. We got a gun, we got the whole thing. It's all good. You want to come in? You want to work for us? And that's overstatement, but you know, if we see these mass retirements and experience, and this is an experienced officer that we're talking about, you know, we're not talking about someone who's only been around for 6 months. You're losing sergeants, you're losing shift commanders, you're losing experienced officers, hopefully that are good officers, you know. And in an odd way, where we can go back to our other discussion where it's like we might be losing some of the bad apples because they don't want to play, like you said, they have the attitude. But most of them, for the sake of argument, let's say they're good, experienced officers. What happens?
That's a great question, and I think that question is what a lot of these unions they're banking on. They're banking on the local governments caving and, you know, picking what their choice to not have a vaccine over, you know, just letting all these guys go to where they can't have, you know, minimum staffing requirements. And, you know, I really think that's what they're doing. They're trying to call their bluff right now. And again, I think it's a control thing. Honestly, I think it's about control. You can't tell me what to do. And, you know, going back to what you were talking about these experienced officers going, that's one thing. My wife and I, we were talking about this earlier because, you know, this has been in the news recently. And I told her, I said, I'd love to see the numbers on the people who are leaving. How many of them are either less than 5 years, so they're not vested into a retirement, or they're of retirement age, so they have a guaranteed paycheck for the rest of their life. The ones that are leaving, there's TikTok videos going around and Facebook videos of people quitting on the radio and whatnot. And I just love to know the numbers of how many of those guys aren't really risking anything. You know, they're getting their retirement check anyway.
They're just bailing out a month early, or
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway. Washington, you saw the video of the guy in Washington who did Washington State, who like signed off and then he's like, F off Isley. Washington's a weird state though. Maybe you can help me with this. This is diverging a little bit, but it's still part of the discussion. So they passed My family lives in Washington, and
Okay.
so they're very upset by this. There's a new law up there where I don't understand it. Have you heard about this? Where it's like they literally have to see the crime in order for them to intervene, and like so, like as they've explained it to me, if a woman gets her purse stolen and they
Hmm.
say that guy right there did it,
Hmm.
I can identify him. The police are not allowed to go after him because they are that way they're profiling because it's saying, oh, well, it's only one person's opinion. We don't have the right to do it. And that's how it was explained to me. And to me, it sounds bizarre. I didn't know if you'd heard anything about this.
I haven't heard anything about that. I know that Washington has quite a few laws that restrict law enforcement officers
Mm-hmm.
in certain ways, but it's more for the public's benefit.
Mm-hmm.
For example, there just one that I remember. I lived in Seattle for a time actually, and so I'm a little familiar. It might have changed since I've been out there, but if you were in an unmarked police car, you couldn't do any traffic enforcement. You had to have a fully marked police car to do traffic enforcement to pull somebody over. That way, that the person knew that it was a police officer, and there wasn't any question on if it was an impersonator. And I know that there are some other similar laws that they have that govern the conduct of their law enforcement.
Yeah.
The one that you're talking about, I don't know. I don't know about that. What I do remember from living in Washington State is it's deeply divided between the sort of more urban area of Seattle, Tacoma, and the rest of the state is,
Yes.
and it's very stark. We used to joke about driving over the Snoqualmie Pass, going from Western Washington to Eastern Washington, and you're going back in time 50 years as soon as
Oh,
you
yeah.
cross the mountain pass.
It's a whole different state.
So
They were always talking growing up. They were
so,
always talking about splitting it in two. Like it would never happen.
yeah.
But they were always like, "Oh yeah, they're gonna go with Idaho, and we're gonna be our own state." And, but so if you had a crystal ball, if you could sit down, like what do you see? And you can be as positive or negative as you want, but be honest. Like what do you see happening in 6 months, in a year? And it's hard because none of us know what's going to happen with COVID. We all try and be optimistic.
Yeah.
But looking at what
Right.
you have right here, what do you think is going to unspool before us?
I think that we are in a very precarious position right now in this country, and I think that this is one of the many major issues that are affecting us right now that go back to the really deep political divide that you're seeing. That's not just played out in the national news and federal elections, but it goes down to state and local elections. And there's quite a bit of division even in small towns, small counties, things like that. And so, as this division grows deeper politically, and as I think that there are judgment calls on a person's character based on what letters next to their name when they vote. I think that just continues to hurt not only say law enforcement, but really any type of public service. There's so much infighting that I think a lot of progress is being hindered from that. So I think that this is a unique opportunity for a lot of local communities, though, and local governments to overhaul their law enforcement, their first responder system. First of all, we talked about that the last time about how the whole defund movement is opening the door for alternative ways to meet public needs without having to send the police to
We
everything.
talk about it's not defund. What was it? Reappropriate? Isn't that what the term we came up with?
Yes,
Are you working on that?
reappropriating the funds, right?
It for us?
I'm working on it, man.
We're gonna get a nickel every time someone uses it.
Exactly, right. And so, I think that there's an opportunity right now for those in the local communities, local governments that can take this time to start to restructure some of their first responders and their police. Long story short, there's going to be cops that leave over a vaccine. I mean, we're seeing that already. There's going to be firefighters and paramedics that leave as well. But now it comes to who's going to fill those spots. So the options are, like you said, if you have a pulse, here's a uniform, which I think it's not too far from the truth. I've actually been I've been approached since I retired as well from the local communities, a couple of local communities out this way asking
they
me if
want
I'm
to bring you
interested.
back.
Yeah, and I'm like,
nice,
no, thank
you. Better
you.
get a nice raise though.
I know, right? Well, that's the thing is the way that the budgets are going. They can't pay anything, and that's the difficulty is getting well vetted people that are going to do a good job, that are going to want to stay for a period of time to where they can establish a new culture within a community. So in 6 months' time, I think I'm very interested to see who capes first in some of these larger places like LA. Like, is LA County going to cave first, or is the sheriff's department, for example?
Oh yeah.
So
because for those who don't know, like, we have our sheriff is basically said he won't enforce anything. So we have this really weird kind of situation where it's kind of a culture war in many ways, because people are policing themselves, and we have the mayor is like, you have to do this, and then our governor is trying to implement a statewide mandate, and the rumor is they're going to put in a statewide vaccine mandate, but we don't know what's true. And then the sheriff is like, I'm not going to enforce it. And then he said, I'm not going to enforce it to his officers, because he's like, what do you say? I'm not going to risk losing a high percentage of my officers because it's a public safety issue. So he's laying it down, and I can see court cases happening with that. But it used to be California kind of set the pace for the nation. Now, I don't know about this. I think I think we're going to have 50 little different discussions on how this goes down.
I think you're right. And, I think, absent, an overarching, subject for all of us to focus on for progress, I think that we'll continue, as in our country will continue to be divided politically, where politics are now becoming a subculture, and, I think that just, it's sort of self-feeds, really, because people get into their echo chambers, and people start to, just like in other subcultures, people start to segregate themselves into like-minded people. Like, absolutely,
tribalism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you get, and if you've listened to the show, because I know you listen to every single episode multiple times because you're that kind of guy.
I take notes.
There's a quiz. And I talk about it all the time, is we see this social media issue and the algorithms and Facebook and all of that. So it insulates people. So I would think, and again, please tell me if I'm wrong, that if a police officer is on Facebook, I'm guessing most of their friends are other police officers, and I'm guessing that they see messages from other police officers. And if this is kind of amplified by, I don't want to say anti-vax, because I don't think this is, while I think there's a lot of people that in that group, just like everywhere else, who are like, no, this is a conspiracy, there's a magnet in it, there's that and that. I think some people, there's a difference between anti-vaxxers scientifically and civil liberty anti-vaxxers. It's a totally different discussion. And they get insulated by that. So they get on Facebook and they get revved up because they're seeing other police officers and maybe across the country being like, I got your back. They're not seeing other people like, I'm worried about you. You're going to go into this tenement building that's, be exposed on a daily basis. So that adds to it.
Absolutely, it does.
And there's a question. So tell me about this. So I think we mentioned that. I think we talked about this on the last show. There's no way, like, the United States there would never be a national policing authority, like, because we are so against the idea of a national level. But it's almost to the point with the Biden administration and this becoming a security issue, a public safety issue. That do you think that there could ever be a level where at a federal level they step in and they're like, no, you have to do this? Is that a concern? Is that something that you think could happen?
So
I think would be all over that.
I think that the federal government would do everything in its power to not have to do that. Well, first of all, just there are tons of legal implications, but just the optics of it, I think, would reinforce a lot of these political ideologies that are already anti big government or anti federal government. It just reinforce the federal fascism, quote unquote, that a lot of people believe that the federal government has become. In very conservative circles, that's a phrase that I hear thrown around a lot. And
overreach is another one.
Overreach, federal overreach. And to keep my pulse sort of our finger on the pulse of other law enforcement officers. I'm a member of a few different social media forums, and I like to see what other officers are saying. And it's exactly what you're saying. I would say that 60% of the officers that I'm seeing are talking about how their local governments can't force them to do anything. It's the principle of it. It's not the vaccine itself. It's the principle of being forced to do something that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
And the other 40% are saying, hey, you're crazy. Just get the vaccination and move on. Like, you're going to destroy your career if you don't do this.
Yeah.
Which is very true as well. And a lot of I've seen arguments break out in the comments section between law enforcement officers who are going back and forth. And again, this is all anecdotal, but it seems like some of the some of the younger officers are saying, well, I don't need it. Like, give it to somebody that's vulnerable. I'll be fine. And there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of how this specific contagion, this virus, works as well. But there are some positive stories out there. I just came across a story of a local health department in Mississippi. Mississippi has the lowest percentage of COVID vaccinations in the country for states. And this one doctor, family practice doctor, that decided to volunteer to help get vaccinations out there, started taking appointments to answer questions for their local first responders. She heard that first responders were being hesitant about taking the vaccine, and so she started contacting them, showing up to roll calls, going to the firehouse, say, hey, I'll sit down with anybody one-on-one for a half hour. I'll review your medical history and I'll answer any questions that you have. And she had a fantastic response to that, and the community that she worked in had a huge explosion in vaccinations among their first responders. And
so they listen, but they listened to her.
They listened to her, and I think one thing is the personal connection. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Another thing, it's not the authority figure, the government, quote unquote, telling you what to do. It's somebody who, again, a doctor is a profession that becomes an identity as well. And so I think there's a sort of a connection there, saying, oh, this person's a doctor. Okay. And here I am, she's sitting in front of me and she's telling me the facts about this. It's not coming from, a press conference or a pharmaceutical company, and all the conspiracy theories that go along with that. It's coming from a person in my community that's telling me this.
Yeah.
And
but you still have to get past that telling me what to do thing. Like you said, like that you've got to try to convince them through facts to it's like you have different levels and you have to get one level up and it'll help convince them on the other level. They have this civil liberty level and health worry issue. If you can get the health worry issue up high enough, then it's going to push the civil liberty part down and be like, okay, this is a good decision. I'm going to do this. But there's some people you're never going to convince them. You're never. Right. They'd rather retire and move to Montana and just be like, F off. I'm not gonna let you tell me what to do.
You're right.
Give me my early pension.
Yeah.
You're right. And those are the scary. That's the scary part. How many are there?
Yeah, and that's the question, isn't it? That's the question. I would like to think that in first responders, that it roughly reflects the statistics nationally within the other assorted demographics that we've talked about between ethnicity, age, rural versus urban, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to think that it's a reflection of the country. We're just looking at a small sample of that, right? Yeah. However, when you look at the amount of police officers that could be lost, you are absolutely looking at a public safety crisis. Not just a complication, but an actual crisis. We've already seen that violent crime is up exponentially since 2020. Many police departments are not responding to low-level calls for service, such as past tense burglaries or white-collar thefts or things like that, which really erodes public trust in law enforcement. And so, what that leads to is higher crime rates. I really think that this is. I understand the urgency of local governments wanting their first responders to have the vaccine. I 100% want that. If a police officer showed up to my house, I'd want to know that they had the vaccine as well. Or she can stand 6 feet away and we can talk through our screen door. That's just not the case for a lot of people. I'm privileged to be able to have that opportunity, but there's a lot of people that live in communities where the police patrol it, and there's a lot of citizen contact, whether they want it or not, and they don't have the luxury of being able to distance themselves or when they come in contact with the police to be able to be distant. And for those that I personally talked to that have been on the fence about getting the vaccine, what I've brought up is, hey, well, how do you know that you're not going to carry this home to your grandmother, or you're not going to give it to your kid? It's not about you; it's about the people around you. Mm-hmm. And then I always use the example of, you lock up your gun at night, right? What are the chances that somebody's going to grab your gun? Your kid is going to go up into your closet door, whatever, right? What are the chances? Oh, less than 1%, right? Well, hey, you still make sure that you put the gun lock on it, right? You still make sure you put it in the safe, or you have the trigger guard on it, whatever, you do to make sure that it's safe. Like, you still do that, not because you're worried that you're going to get hurt, but the chance of somebody else getting hurt and that being on your conscience. You don't want that.
How does that go over? How does that go over with people?
It goes over well. Honestly, it goes over well. I get a lot of silence on the other end, and okay, yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
But that's coming from me, a retired detective, and not, the health commissioner of a state, saying, hey, why don't you guys? So one thing that I've noticed, especially in training, again, this is anecdotal, but I would love if any other law enforcement's listening to your show to leave in the comments of wherever you post this, wherever your social media is, and see if it's their experience. But in my experience, cops do not like to be told what to do by people that aren't cops. Right. So for training, when they would bring in people that were not law enforcement officers to teach certain things in training, they'll say, well, you have no idea what we do every day. You don't have the experience that we do. You have the theory, but you don't know the practicalities of how things work. And in training in general, I was a general instructor, and I instructed all different things. And there was always so much cynicism to training, to learning something new, because it challenged the authority of what that officer had learned, and there was always a hill that had to be surmounted in order to get that buy-in to whatever was being taught. And so I think, peer-to-peer is probably really good, or, somebody, a trusted member in the community to come in. If I were a member of a command staff right now of a police department, I think my first move right now, if we were looking at vaccine mandates and we had, over, say, 25% or over the people that haven't complied yet, I would sit down with them and ask them, what would it take for you to be open to the idea? What are you uncomfortable with? And if it was, well, we don't know the research, I'd reach out to researchers to say, hey, come in. Can you explain to my troops what's going on? Can you come in and answer their questions? If it was about the efficacy of it, I'd find some physicians to come in and talk to them about it, answer questions, put them on the spot. And the unknown, the fear of the unknown out there of, how is this going to affect me? You start to tear down all of those, the hesitancy and the obstruction to, compliance and getting it, when you start taking away those barriers that are in place, whether it's I don't trust the research, or I know somebody that got hurt. Well, let's look at the statistics or whatever. But bring in people that are authorities in their field to say, hey, I'll answer your questions.
You almost need a COVID officer. You need like somebody who's a police. It's like in the military. You have a chaplain who's an officer. Mm-hmm. You have doctors who are in the military. I mean, you almost need a police officer who's trained. Maybe it's a public affairs officer that takes a training or something, but you almost need someone, that they, like you said, that they respect, that they'll listen to, who's one of them.
Yes.
But if that went down, the union would come in and they say, hey, you don't negotiate without us. No. We need to have a 10-month program, and you're gonna... They would never do that. You could get this done in like contract. A week. Nah. No, I know that something that we talked about this before, and one of the things that you hold very close to your heart is the emotional health, the morale part of that. Have you seen that? Like some of the people you're talking to, have you seen any symptoms of, I hate to use symptoms because we're talking about COVID, but have you seen any of these kind of cracks in the foundation of people, whether it's the people are retiring, how are we going to deal with that? Just the hack of the job, the people are getting sick, the death rates, the sick rates, like how is that affecting the actual morale of people that you're seeing and your friends and your former comrades?
The people that I talk to, just burnout is probably the word that encapsulates it all. Just absolute burnout. Coming from a couple of years of bad publicity, and then because of COVID, pay freezes to the Great Resignation, as they're calling it now.
Are they really calling it that?
The Great Resignation. That is how. God, it wasn't a journal article that I read, just across all labor segments. There. The
strikes and everything. Okay, yeah,
exactly.
I thought it was like specifically for cops. I was.
No, but not just the public sector, but everywhere. With people leaving, and with police departments losing staff and personnel. The department I used to work for, they're sending a little bit like what Seattle's doing. They're putting detectives, they're paring down their detective units and putting them back on the street for patrol. They're eliminating a lot of non-patrol positions to have those officers back, answering calls for service, because the rank and file officer is inundated with calls for service, and it's almost overwhelming in some areas. Where some officers there's a 2 or 3 hour wait time between the time you call for like a non-emergency police response. It's so backed up now, and that with the pay freezes, and then also having to deal with family members and friends that are either seriously ill or who have died from COVID. I don't know anybody that doesn't know somebody that has died from COVID. I think we all have been touched by it at some point, and so just the absolute burnout right now. I hear a couple of things. I hear, hey, I love this job so much, or if I didn't love it so much, I would go and find something else, but there's hope for the future. And then I hear from guys that say, I'm too invested now. I have to get to my retirement age. Like, it's just too much work into it now. I can't leave. That with morale being so low, I think that the danger is that the quality of service that the public receives is going to be lowered, which would be, that would happen in any industry where there's just burnout, and, overworked personnel.
When you say the quality of service, like what could you see happening? Like beyond response time, obviously, but what does that mean?
I could see, an officer just being so tired of going to, 20, 25 calls per service in an 8-hour period that they get to one, they ask the minimum amount of questions. They're not really invested in doing it, and they're moving on to the next one. A reality is that for a lot of police departments I know, when there's an officer that's on the scene of a non-emergency call, and the clock is ticking, and 15 minutes, 20 minutes goes by, their supervisor's calling them on the radio saying, hey, why are you still there? What are you doing? Like, let's move on to the next one. You got to move on to the next one. But that really decreases the quality of response, because calls for service we talked about last time, officers can go from anything to a small fender bender to a homicide, and everywhere and anywhere in between. And there are some critical data that they have to gather in order to decide what the best response is next, or who the next person is that needs to be on scene, whether it's an investigator or crime scene or whatnot. So
are the departments, are they in a position now to be able to offer some sort of help on that morale? Or are they just so overwhelmed? It's like, now is not the time to deal with it. We're just trying to serve the public.
I think what's happening is different departments are handling it differently. The department that I came from, they've been trying to handle it very well. I've liked all of the decisions of the police chief that now runs the department that I came from. There are some really good progressive decisions being made that will actually help officers and the public. But really, I think that overall the response from a lot of police agencies are going to be, hey, we have a minimum amount of officers that we have to keep on the force in order to keep our accreditation, or in order to keep our contract, or whatever. That's going to be the bottom line, that those calls for service get answered, and that the minimum amount of officers show up. I think that we're just in a time right now where there's not the personnel or the finances to focus on officer health for the most part. It's difficult, but then it's a self-perpetuating cycle, though, isn't it? Because if you don't address officer mental health, it's just going to feed the cycle of burnout.
Well, let's play hypothetical for a second, because you're going to be chief of police somewhere at some point. We know you're going to head back. Here's your stump speech. Let's play hypothetical. So you've already said a couple things, but let's say that you went against your wife's wishes, and you took
soon to be ex-wife. If I did that,
your soon ex-wife. Let's say you did this. Let's say you went into we won't give you a geographical thing. Let's say you got brought in, they made you chief of police. You're dealing with basically the stereotypical is not the right word. Basically, you're dealing with the same kind of problems everybody else is, somewhere in the middle. It's not the worst, it's not the best. You've got all of these issues. You've got the high level of officers who won't get vaccinated. Morale is down. You're not serving the public in the way that you feel that the officer should be. You've got the mayor breathing down your neck. You've got, everything's going wrong. What would you do in your first couple of days in your power stepping in there? What would you do?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that I would do is I would approach the rank and file, not the command staff, not the supervisors, but the rank and file, and say, what needs to be fixed around here? What is it? What do you need to do your job effectively and to stick around? Okay. And of course, there are going to be things that just are not surmountable, right? Give me $100,000 raise. Well, yeah, that's not going to happen, right? There's so much good feedback where you can sort of discern what the real problem is. Yeah. If it's I haven't had vacation in 2 years because of manpower issues. Okay, great. Let's take a look at manpower. Let's take a look at where our sworn officers are working. How many do we have on our investigative team? How many can go back to patrol, to supplement patrol? What non-patrol officers are working and getting their full paycheck, but they're doing a desk job? Can we make those civilian positions where we can save money on pension and send those officers the numbers back to the street? So I'd want to look at the infrastructure of personnel to see where everybody's at. I'd want to see what the rank and file is concerned about and what they think would fix some of their burnout issues. But from there, I want to talk to the public as well and have a public forum and say, hey, tell me how your department has been performing for you over the past 12 months. What have you seen? What's good? What's bad? What would you like to see changed? And because law enforcement cannot function without public trust. You could have the best, most qualified officers, but if the public doesn't trust them, they're going to be ineffective. People aren't going to call the police. People aren't going to give the necessary information that is needed to solve crimes. Right.
Yeah.
People are going to fear the police instead of call them, which we've seen that in so many communities.
That's an odd thing too, because like you said earlier, there was the whole thing where, if you're not vaccinated, stand on the other end, on the other side of the screen door, 6 feet away. So now you've got, going back to our last time you were on the show, when we were talking about BLM and not wanting to trust the police, rightfully so, and all that. So now you've got a situation where you have certain people that already don't trust the police because they're worried that they're going to shoot them or they're not going to treat them with the respect they deserve. Now they have to worry that this officer that they're dealing with is going to hurt them in another way. They're not adhering to the rules. So you've amplified the problem in certain areas, and there's another snowball effect.
It's a PR nightmare is what it is. It really is. I mean, it was difficult enough to get officers to comply with wearing masks while they were on patrol, and
and they're not in New York. They have. Did you hear about the guy that got beat up by the cops because he was asking him why aren't they wearing their mask in the subway? And
I saw the video
him down the.
I saw that, and which is it goes directly against the entire reason why we have departments that are overseen by the government, because they're servants of the public, right? Yeah. So I saw that and I thought, man, what would happen if I tried to throw out throw my boss out of a subway station, because that's what it was, right? They're throwing a member of the public for telling, asking them, why aren't you doing your job? While I hope that those are few and far between, I think that what we see is that the public trust again is being eroded by officers that don't want to comply with what is going to be best for the public. And I for the life of me, I can't grasp like why the argument of, hey, this is good for the public. This makes your job easier, right? Wear a mask, get the vaccination. If your doctor says it's not going to hurt you, right? If you don't need a medical exemption, just do it. There's, it'll help you do your job. It'll make you more effective.
It's the union. I'm like, and I don't say that because I have some insight into it. You have way more than I do, but that's just like right here, and I'm pounding my pointing to my gut. Yeah. I just feel like it has something to do with that, because you've got a union it's a conservative leaning. There's money involved. Who knows what conversations are happening behind the scenes. That's my feeling, and anyone is welcome to argue with me on that, because I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just like, that I think is a major part of the issue, because the police unions, and we talked about this last time, they bark first and then they actually see what's going on with the situation. So I feel like they're acting out without the will necessarily of the entire police force. That's my thought.
Well, and a police union in its design is to be an authority that challenges the local government that employs the laborers within the union, which are law enforcement. It's to be an adversary to make sure that the employees retain the power. Now, there's a whole other conversation which would be fantastic to get some labor attorneys on here and talk about unions, public sector unions versus private sector unions. I think that'd be a fantastic conversation. I would love to have that conversation. There's a thought out there that the public sector should not have unions given their position as public servants, which is interesting. But yeah, there's already an oppositional and adversarial relationship between a union and say a public sector union and the actual community or jurisdiction that employs the members of the union, right? So they're always at odds, right? Yeah. They're always on opposite sides of the spectrum. So I can imagine, if a law came out or a policy came out. Well, hey, employees, they can't eat ham sandwiches anymore. They would have, ham sandwich, protests in the streets for, limiting the free will of the people to
they have a
ham
plan
sandwich,
for that.
So
I think they've already prepped that. I feel like the union has like the playbook for like infinite number of outcomes. Like they're ready for everything. It's like, oh, no ham sandwiches. That's plan 48C. We're already ready for that.
It's in the handbook already.
It's in that little white handbook that goes in the pocket. It's like only ham. Then there's one for ham and cheese, and then there's one for this.
No doubt.
There's an interesting opportunity here, though, I think. And I'm really curious to see what you think, because we've talked about training last time you and I talked, and how there needs to be a change, and there needs to be a change in the way that not only police are trained, but the accountability, and it's a machine. The entire thing is a machine, and you can't really stop the machine and retool it. But now, in a way, you almost are seeing the machine kind of at least slow down, because if all of these police departments are going to need to hire new police, they're going to need to replace these police that are retiring, there's an opportunity to get in there and implement these new policies, to implement this training for the next generation, because at least you're dealing with a larger number that are coming in. Am I onto something?
Oh,
I run for chief of police?
100 you should do it. I honestly, I think that you're absolutely right. I think this is the time. On the back, what we now have years of public sentiment wanting reform in law enforcement. Really, we go back to the Ferguson days. I think a fire was ignited in the national consciousness about police conduct. And then from there Baltimore, and then from there Eric Gardner, and I mean there's so many names, right? And then it was rekindled again during the murder of George Floyd and everything, that the fallout from that. I think that there is an appetite nationally for policing to be reformed, and we've talked about how difficult it is to paint in broad strokes about that, because there are 18,000 different agencies. But I think that there are enough people in enough pockets of the country that they can have influence over that, and over bringing in some of the change here, especially with seeing the how many officers are leaving the profession, and how many officers may leave over the vaccine issue. There's obviously an employment crisis, but if these local governments and entities, they take this time to strategize on, who do we want in here? What type of person is the person we want, protecting the public and being a part of public safety? And what does law enforcement in general look like now? What does it look like in 50 years from now? Like, now's the time to start looking at that.
So how do people, I mean, we obviously saw last year one way for people to get their opinion out through protest and through all of that, but that doesn't always work. It doesn't always have to. We don't want to have protests every week when people are like, well, we want policing to change in our town, so we're going to go picket City Hall. So how do people who are already people who are afraid of the police, people who believe that it can't be changed, or that's the way it is, I'm just going to stay in my house, they teach their kids to walk on the other side of the street. I mean, you and I both, we're about the same age. You and I remember when we were kids, you were taught, hey, if you're in trouble, find a police officer. And we know now, and not just African Americans, we know white kids are now taught not to do that. They're taught not to go to a police officer for help unless it's a horrible, horrible situation and they have no other choice. So what do people do? How do they get their changes that they believe, like you're saying, to be listened to by cities, by towns, by the police, by the people who can make those changes happen?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I think what we need to start doing, I think, is approaching the people in our communities, people of influence and people of privilege in our communities, and getting them on board with those changes. So
people of privilege, what do you mean by people of privilege?
Okay. So in my experience in my career, one person can call the police and complain about one thing and it could just go unheeded. But another person can call the police, and if they have the right connections, the right privilege, if they're a prominent member of the community, it's going to be taken care of. And it's not fair, and it speaks of inequity and inequality. But I think that's just the environment that we're in now. But so I think that in each community there are people of privilege and people of the people that local governments will listen to, right? Or, they say that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Well, some wheels are squeakier than others, and I can tell you that I've seen that be a super effective strategy in not just small communities, but large metropolitan communities, to people that want to bring about change, to have a group to approach somebody that either in power, whether it's a town councilman, a city council person on the board of county supervisors, somebody that will listen to them and bring along somebody that is influential in the community, whether it's a business owner, whether it's a faith leader, etc. And those, honestly, in local government, those are the people that get listened to. And again, it's not fair, but I believe that if with the right network, things can start to change, right? Or at least those ideas can begin to blossom. The seeds of change are already there. I think we've seen that over the past several years. I think that a lot of different communities are ripe for some change, especially now as we see the average age of a United States resident become younger and younger. I think that with that comes a culture shift as well, and not just for policing, but for governance in general. I was having a conversation with my father, who remembers back in before the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and he lived down in South Carolina, and he remembers segregation, and to think, wow, my own father lived through like actual government sanctioned segregation. Like, we're not that far removed from some of this stuff, right? We really aren't. And to we were talking about how back then, and growing up in the 60s, that if you saw a police officer that yes sir, no sir, smiled and waved, whatever you want, there was no questioning, and if you did, you got the business end of a nightstick. And the U.S. Constitution hasn't changed since then. It's just more people are knowledgeable of what their rights are, and it is fully within a citizen's right to question the actions of their law enforcement.
There is a lot of misinformation out there. I got sucked into the vortex that is TikTok, and I don't know if you've ever been down that, but there are tons of videos of people, and we talked about this. There was a term you told me about it. I can't remember it right now, but people who push they're not instigators, but they're like
the First Amendment auditors. That's the one term. Group, the auditors. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. And then there's videos, these TikToks are starting to pop up from attorneys, and they'll actually parse these videos, and they're like, who's right, who's wrong. And there's a lot of things where, like, I don't have a badge number, and they're like, everybody has a badge number, and they're like, no, actually in certain police departments they don't, and they go through, and it's really, there's a lot of misinformation about what your rights are and what they have to do, where you can film, what they have to tell you, how they search your car. They showed one where the one that kind of like made me stop was you actually saw the guy with the dog, and you saw him pull the dog, and the dog went, oof, and they go, oh, you've got something in your car, we can search it now. So there is that misinformation out there. So that's a problem as well. What you said, it kind of reminds me, because you're talking about the civil rights movement. It's almost this like Kennedy mantra, where the Kennedy family was like, and yes, this, I'm gonna get so much hate mail for saying this, but it's yes, the Kennedys had their issues, but one of the things that you did hear about them was they kind of said, well, we are lucky, and that's why civil rights are important to us, because we can make a difference, and let's use the power that we have. And there's some people that said, well, it was just for political reasons and whatever, but it's interesting you say that like you have to get certain people on your side, and they're the ones that are going to help implement change, which is sad too at the same point that you have to do it that way. It
is. And I'd like to say that things can change, though. I'd like to remain optimistic.
I was going to ask you, are you optimistic, Matthew? Are you optimistic?
So the further.
Now hold on, I have to give the visual here because I wish we did video. Next year we're going to start doing video. But as he said that, he put his hand on his forehead and took a breath.
I did. Yes, I did. A deep sigh. There was a deep sigh. I like to think, and my wife can attest to this, that the farther that I get removed from my previous career in law enforcement, the more optimistic I become, I think, about the future.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think working in that world, I think I just got sucked into so much negativity. Nobody calls the police on a good day, right? And so I always used to say that I'm possibly talking to somebody on their very worst day of their life, right? Dealing with the worst part of people as well, and that can really mess with your mind and your outlook on the world in general. And so now that I work in consultancy and I work with people that are excited about change and that think that change can be had in their community, that makes me hopeful. It does. It makes me hopeful. Something else that makes me hopeful is the younger generation of people that I've come into contact with now seem to be, I guess, what's the word? Impassioned for change in a way that I don't think I was. Not just that, but also more informed as well. I was talking to a 19-year-old kid. Don't call him a kid. He's an adult. A 19-year-old young man.
I call them kids.
And
I do. Right.
I definitely feel like a 19-year-old's a kid now. But I was talking to a 19-year-old kid about he was talking about his education and about what he wants to do. And he wants to invest in his community, and he wants to help his community grow economically and all this stuff. And part of me, I was just thinking, oh, you sweet summer child, you have youth is wasted on the young. You have no idea what you're talking about. Life hasn't beat you down yet.
Dang.
I know. It's tough. But the other part of me was like, wow, when I was 19 years old, gosh, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about, where was the next party that I was going to go to,
Yeah.
So, it's different. I think that the younger generation is more motivated to change, especially when they're forced to confront the truth about, the decline of the American economy and climate change and all these really scary issues that are going to be issues that our generation and the generation above us has left this younger generation to fix and deal with.
We do. We give them, and I'll admit it, we give them a really hard time, and I do too all the time. But they do have the issues that they are faced with are unlike anything any generation has had to deal with before. It's no wonder they're in their phone and dealing with playing on TikTok and all of that stuff. I mean, I do that now, and I don't have the same issues that they have. So, I can totally understand that. Let me ask you something. Do you miss being a cop?
I miss the satisfaction of making a good case. So I worked some pretty big cases. I worked on a federal task force. I got to go all over the country furthering investigations. I also worked in the Special Victims Bureau, so I worked helping out kids. I focused specifically on child sex crime, and long-term sex abuse in children. And so those investigations. And so I have never had satisfaction like being able to prove a case that was able to bring justice for somebody that was vulnerable. Right. I just, it's a high that I don't think can be chased by anything else, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, but it also is a double-edged sword, because with that came the very intense stress and anxiety that I talked to you about the last time, and becoming 110% invested in my work and letting it consume me and neglecting my family because of it. So there are times where I absolutely, I do miss it. I miss the jobs that I used to do. Being in law enforcement in general, I felt was like the necessary evil in order to do the job that I like to do in investigations. And so, and I've toyed around with the idea of looking at some, possible elected positions in the future where I can have influence over that. So,
oh, really?
But yeah, I feel like the time for me to be a beat cop, I feel like I'm too old now. I don't have the energy I used to, but I think that I've gained enough experience that I think, I do policy consultation now, and I help people come up with a plan to improve their community and improve their agency and whatnot. I do that a bit, but
okay. So
I would like to be.
I'm not letting you get away from this. So
okay,
without getting into anything,
mm-hmm.
if you were an elected official, you would bring this police background to the job, and that's so you would be helping make decisions and make policy. It's like having a president who actually served in the military. So when they send when they send soldiers off to war, they actually know what it's like to have fought in that war. It changes the landscape incredibly if that happened.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what my thought was in toying around with these ideas. One thing that I heard so often throughout my career about some local government politicians is that, they don't understand what we do every day. I understand what large amounts of law enforcement do every day. I've been there myself. And so I also understand, the complexity of implementing new policies. And I think that there is a place for that experience to bring about some good change, to revolutionize the way that law enforcement and public safety is implemented in communities today. We talked about this last time, and I think that now's the time to start exploring opportunities to revolutionize public safety, to move it from the traditional occupying force of armed police in the community to exploring other options for public safety out there that can not only help reduce violence in the community, but can also help improve trust of local government, services such as mental health services, services that help people that are struggling financially as well. As we see the economy decline over the last 2 years, as it has, a lot more people are hurting, especially over COVID. We've seen that, and really good policy that affects people, people in the community, not that affects them, that doesn't just look good on paper, right? But that actually has a practical, way of really meeting some of these needs in the community. I think that's important. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but
also, if you do that, your wife's not going to leave you.
Well, that's the most important thing. That's like the highest thing on my list. I've been married for, we've been together for 15 years now. And so high on my list is I can't lose her. The reason that I can't lose her, the most important thing is I will never be able to find my car keys ever again. It's just a thing. I don't know what happens.
So the obvious answer to this question is the stress, and we talked to, and I would advise anybody who is enjoying this, go back and check out the first episode that you were on, and you get all the amazing background about your time working with the sex crimes unit and with the kids and the federal stuff, and it's like fascinating, and what you went through, and how your wife went in and talked to your boss and said he's done.
Yeah.
That was a great story. I feel like I know her after all of it. But so, and you could take a lighthearted approach to this, but what don't you miss about being a police officer?
Besides there's so much that I don't miss.
The shoes and the belt.
Oh, gosh. So I could tell. So for the last several years, I was in a suit and tie, but carrying a gun, I hated carrying a gun. Honestly, it felt so unnecessary. There were very few times that I ever had to even think about drawing my gun, and I usually knew beforehand that I was going to be in that position. So I hated wearing a gun. It felt awkward. I hated having to wear a badge. Whenever the weather was cold enough, I would just wear an overcoat and hide those things if I had to go somewhere, just because I didn't feel like people looking at me or wondering or asking me legal questions. And it's always a big thing at a party that, you start talking to people at a party. Hey, what do you do? Hey, what do you do? And, oh, I'm a police detective, or, I'm in law enforcement, whatever. And, oh my gosh, well, I got this ticket last year. That cop, he was a jerk. And what do you think about this? I got a question. Everybody has those stories,
You're like, it's like a doctor. This toe's infected. Will you look at this? Hey, I got a traffic ticket. Can you take care of this?
Exactly.
Which is weird though, because I would think, there's a lot of people, a lot of police officers who that's part of what they love about it is like, look at me, I've got the badge, I got this, I hold the power. And you were like, nope.
I think the second or third time that I just got my butt completely kicked, back when I worked for a small town police department, and I didn't have any backup. I had to actually go hand to hand several times. And once I realized that the badge itself doesn't stop somebody from trying to punch you in the face,
no, but that wore off. It makes them do it more.
Exactly. It wore off really quick. I used to tell people that I worked in waste management, because all I did was deal with people's excrement all day.
But then they're like, oh, he's a mob.
So
I dated a girl once who worked for a talent agency, and in LA, like, you don't want to do that because everybody's an actor, everybody's, they're always like, oh, well, here's my resume. So she used to tell people that she was a hitman. And she would literally, and she'd like wink at them, and they wouldn't know if she was telling the truth or not. She's like, all right. She's from Jersey, or she was from Maryland, so she had this weird like Maryland accent.
Oh, that mid-Atlantic accent.
Yeah. So everybody really was like, I think she is. So man, it's been great. You got some amazing insights in all this, and I'm really appreciate that you were able to do this so quick, and we're gonna get that going. Are you doing social media yet? Are you getting all of your stuff out there? What's going on with that?
So my wife and I, we have a company. It's called Right Left Solutions, and we both have separate sides. We do some marketing. That's her background, but we do marketing, we do consultancy. And so I do policy consultancy for community organizations and local governments that want to take a look at their policies, see what they can do to specifically looking at their first responders, to see what they can do to improve policy, improve employment, and really revolutionize the way that we're protecting our public. So if anybody wants to have a conversation about that, they can check out my website. It's rightleftSolutions.com. Right as in WRITE, leftSolutions.com.
And we'll make sure it's in the show notes too, so people can click through. When are you going to start your own show? When are you going to start your own show? Oh my gosh. Come on.
Oh gosh. I'm so well, as you know, the market is saturated, and it takes something special in order to stand out from the crowd. I think that you stole my idea, and so now I have to find another one. Having a conversational show where you talk to people that are, thought leaders in their industry, but it's more of a conversation and talking about relevant issues. And the one thing that, and you living in LA, I think hopefully you'll appreciate this. I love listening to podcasts. My favorite podcasts to listen to are ones that have nothing to do with current affairs. I like the celebrity ones, but after a while, I realized I'm only listening to shows where celebrities are inviting other celebrities onto their shows, and they're both talking about how they are both so great. Oh, you're so great. You were great. Oh, well, you're great. Oh, thank you for, like
it's the mutual masturbation show.
That's exactly what it was. And
my mother just cringed.
No doubt. I wasn't sure if this had a little E next to it when it airs or not. So I was trying to be careful.
I did one. A couple people have like gotten very passionate about what they talk about, and they're like, "F this, F that." I'm like, you know what? If it's real, do it. It's that's exactly what I didn't want to do on this show. I didn't want to have this like promotional show where it was just, I'm on here to promote a book, and the fun thing, and you do it too. Is the fun thing. And I always quote, you remember The Real World, the show The Real World? Okay. Yeah. So the line was, when people stop being nice and start being real, there's a point in every interview, and you weren't as much this time, but every interview, it's like the first half hour, people are kind of like, well, this is what I'm talking about. Here's my practice lines. Here's whatever. And then there's a point where they kind of run out of their scripted comments. And that's when I pounce. That's when I'm like, okay, now it's time for me to get in, and we're really going to talk and whatever. And I get some great, I've gotten some great feedback and some really great comments. That's good. I think people enjoy it. And I think they really dig the fact that we're having a back and forth conversation. And I try to listen, and and if it's interesting to me, I think it's going to be interesting to other people. And that's just kind of how I believe. And it seems to be paying off. So we'll see. I enjoy it. I feel more edumacated than I did when I started all this. So it keeps going. So thank you so much, man. We'll put the website in the show notes, and we'll get you on again. And hopefully your optimism pays off. And
I hope so.
I really appreciate it, man. Matt Newbauer, thanks, man.
Thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate it.
I'm John Brooks. I wanted to explore the things human beings believe and how those beliefs manifest themselves in our culture.
The Puritan movement was born out of the white evangelical Christian church.
And much of what's being torn down today is a 19th century image of Columbus, when various nations, young nations like the United States, were searching for what some historians call a usable past.
What do you know about the Antichrist?
Most of what I know about the Antichrist is from random media.
Suddenly there's this miracle drink that you can drink and not die, and also you're not going to get drunk. Yeah, it turns out there's like a lot of things that you could be sentenced to death for concerning cats.
I actually didn't know that one. That's pretty impressive.
So Tony Ortega, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you believe in Xenu? And they're just like, that was like 1 hour, 1 day of my 30-year career,
Is there any reason to believe that the Russians planted this idea that Hitler had survived?
Your instincts, I think, on this, John, are absolutely right.
Hello, and welcome to Hard to Believe. How was that?
Pretty good, except the show's called Our Fake History.
Oh, no, you're on my show. So why stay with the Baptist and not enter into any of these other countless kind of more progressive churches?
The thing about Baptists is every Baptist congregation or group of Baptists is totally independent and free to be as liberal or as conservative, as fundamentalist or progressive as they want to be.
What's your sense of why Lovecraft, A, was a failure, but then B, ultimately became a posthumous success?
Yeah, that's complicated, but in some ways it's fairly straightforward.
Really, to understand the ancient Tatooine of the Philippines, you have to understand the culture that it came from, and unfortunately the modern Filipino culture is not necessarily representative of that anymore.
Everything about Jesus and the Master and the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit was always just very confusing to me. And it also seemed to be very confining.
Can love you without any awareness of who they are or where they came from. Christian faith is essential to who they are.
So some of the things that we cover would include, say, the Branch Davidian siege and Scientology and Wicca. And those three things have absolutely nothing to do with each other, right? Except they all freak out Protestants.
He's very well educated, he's a good Catholic, and he views the politics of the Nazis as something that he might find on the bottom of his shoe.
One of the things that Roddenberry was trying to do with Star Trek is to say,
What will be the evolution of the human psyche, of human morality?
All the different artworks showing unexplained phenomenon from the beginning of recorded history. This is not a recent phenomenon.
That Prometheus isn't looking so crazy now.
That's a really interesting question.
That's a great question.
Good question. That is such a good question.
It's hard to believe.
Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed the show. Help us spread the word by subscribing and leaving a review. If you want to support us even more, you can find a link to our Patreon account in the show notes. And if you're one of our diehard fans, head on over to the VikingDogStore.com, where you can find official Open Highway merchandise to show your support to the entire world. But most of all, thanks for listening.
For the highways of America, which for so many years were an assortment of as many designs and pavements as there were states, are now becoming one big road that can take you anywhere faster, safer, and more directly than ever before. What is this big road? Where is it going? How much has been built? How much is yet to come? These are questions we ask. Certainly traveling the entire system would be a memorable experience, but few of us have the time for such a trip.
All rights reserved. Viking Dog 2021.